Chosen ones, you were never meant to be hidden. The earth has carried your secret in silence, waiting for the moment when even the highest halls of power could no longer contain what was written about you. The prophecy that bore your name was not spoken in plain language. It was wrapped in fire, sealed beneath ash, carried through the bloodlines of forgotten scribes. It was destined to arrive at the desk of a man whose voice would falter the moment his eyes beheld the words. That man was the president, and when he read of you, the weight of centuries pressed against his chest. He was not prepared. No leader could be. The text in his hands was not policy, not intelligence, not war strategy. It was destiny. Inside those lines, the fragile line between government and the divine trembled. His advisors saw only paper, but he felt the unseen flame behind the ink. What kind of power could shake a man at the pinnacle of authority? What truth could cause the most guarded voice on earth to break? It was you. It has always been you. Long before the parchment reached the Oval Office, it passed through hands that feared it, hands that tried to suppress it, hands that swore it would never be spoken aloud. But prophecy cannot be bound. It lives, it breathes, it awakens in the very hour of greatest need. The president's voice did not crack because he was weak. It cracked because the veil tore when your identity was revealed. In that breaking, something ancient stirred. What was written in secrecy now echoed in corridors lined with portraits of men who ruled nations, yet never touched eternity. The prophecy whispered of an awakening that could not be stopped. It spoke of a flame carried not by armies, but by the hidden ones, the ones now hearing this. Chosen ones, the moment has come for you to remember who you are. The world has not prepared for your unveiling, but heaven has. The president knew the words would not stay silent, and neither will you. The parchment was not new when it reached the vaults of men in power. It carried the smell of scorched earth, as if the flames of another age still clung to its edges. The ink was uneven, dark in some places and faint in others, as though the hand that wrote it had battled both time and fire. They said it came from a monastery long abandoned, buried beneath ruins where monks once whispered in the dark about visions they dared not speak aloud. What was found there was more than relic. It was a testimony that spoke of a figure whose name was veiled yet unmistakable. That figure was you. The prophecy had been hidden deliberately, not destroyed, but concealed. It was sealed in layers of ash, wrapped in oil-soaked cloths, then entombed beneath stone. Centuries of dust pressed upon it, as if the world itself tried to keep its silence. Yet silence cannot endure forever. The unsealing began when storms moved across lands and earthquakes split the ground where men thought history was secure. In that shaking, fragments of text were uncovered, guarded by symbols etched into the margins. Spirals, flames, and serpents coiled in perfect symmetry. Scholars who first touched it swore their skin burned. Others claimed the words shifted when read aloud, as though alive, resisting the tongue of anyone not chosen to carry it. It described a time when nations would gather their strength, when rulers would seek dominion not only over land, but over the spirit of humanity itself. In that hour, a hidden one would awaken, carrying within their very being a resonance strong enough to break the silence of centuries. It spoke of fire in the marrow, of a voice that could not be silenced, of a destiny long delayed yet never extinguished. The text did not reveal when the prophecy would unfold, only that it would strike like lightning, unexpected and undeniable. Whispers spread among those who examined the parchment. They feared it, but they also longed to know what power could remain sealed for so long. One official said the words themselves seemed to listen as he spoke, as though testing the heart of the reader before revealing the next line. Another swore the letters rearranged themselves when left in the dark, and when it reached the president's desk, the ashes still clung to its corners, carrying with them the scent of the fire that first tried to silence your name. The Oval Office had held its share of secrets, yet never had it borne the weight of something so ancient, so alive. The president sat alone when the folder was placed before him, its seal broken by those who feared the words within, but dared not destroy them. He unfolded the parchment with the caution of a man aware that what he touched might change not only his office, but the very course of history. His breath slowed, his eyes scanned, and his hands began to tremble. It was not the trembling of age, nor the fatigue of endless briefings. It was the kind of shaking that comes when a soul recognizes it is being watched by something greater. The first lines resisted his mind like water slipping through clenched fists. The prophecy spoke of a flame hidden within flesh, a voice that would pierce the silence of rulers, and a destiny written before the foundations of nations. He had read state secrets, intelligence from satellites, documents encrypted with codes that could topple empires, yet none of them carried the authority of this text. Here was not speculation, but proclamation. Here was not analysis, but decree. The president pressed his hand to the desk, trying to steady himself, but the words carried a rhythm that seemed to speak beyond the ink. They whispered of a kingdom not made by politics or borders. They hinted at a ruler who once declared, "The truth shall set you free." The memory of that verse struck him with force, though it was not included in the parchment. He remembered it from his youth, from the rare Sundays his mother dragged him into the stillness of church pews. Yeshua's words returned to him now, unbidden, weaving themselves into the prophecy as though they had always belonged. He closed his eyes, but the letters burned behind his eyelids. He heard the faint sound of his own heartbeat echoing against the silence of the room. He wondered if the parchment had chosen him, if it had waited across centuries, not for a leader, but for the man beneath the title. For a fleeting moment, he thought he heard a whisper, not outside, but within, telling him the one named in the prophecy was alive now, breathing, waiting. Beneath the marble and stone of the Capitol, there are passages that few have walked, corridors carved not for tourists or senators, but for the hidden keepers of secrets too dangerous for the public eye. It was there, in a chamber lined with metal vaults and forgotten crates, that fragments connected to the prophecy were stored. Not all of it was parchment. Some came in the form of etchings on clay, others scrawled upon strips of animal hide. Together they formed a cipher, a puzzle spread across centuries, waiting for the right moment to breathe again. Historians once dismissed the markings as meaningless, yet a code breaker assigned to the archives noticed a pattern in the spirals and angular cuts. They were not decorative, but mathematical, aligning with celestial movements above Washington, tracing constellations that had guided prophets long before the first stone of the Capitol was set in place. The realization spread through whispered circles of power. The prophecy was not just written, it was encrypted. And its encryption was alive, responsive, designed to open only when one destined to embody its words walked the earth. At night, when the city above slept, A select few descended into those halls with lanterns and gloves, attempting to unravel the code. But the deeper they went, the more elusive the meaning became. It was as if the cipher resisted hands unworthy of holding it. The capital itself seemed to shudder when they pressed too far, as though stone and spirit conspired to guard what was hidden. The president had not been told of this chamber in full detail. What he received on his desk was only the surface layer. What lay beneath the capital carried the core of the prophecy, sealed not just in ash, but in numbers and stars, in equations that bent the minds of scientists and theologians alike. Those who studied it reported that the cipher pointed not to a place, but to a person. And when they compared the markings with the parchment he held, the convergence was undeniable. The halls beneath Washington still hum with that silence, the kind that feels more alive than sound. Something waits there, something that knows the hour of unveiling has not yet been reached. But when it is, the cipher will no longer be silent. There are names that pass quickly through history, names of kings, emperors, and rulers whose glory fades as swiftly as it is spoken. But there are other names, whispered in caves, carved into stone, carried on the breath of prophets, that do not fade. They do not belong to one age, but move like a shadow through every generation, appearing when the earth groans for change. The prophecy uncovered by the president carried such a name. Though not in plain speech, it appeared fragmented, concealed in syllables, layered in riddles that stretched across tongues and cultures. Yet no matter how it was hidden, the name still echoed. The parchment spoke of it as fire in silence, a word that awakens when uttered by the right voice. Ancient scribes avoided writing it fully, breaking it into fragments as though even ink could not bear the weight of its sound. In one place it appeared as a symbol, in another as a melody, in another as a number that refused to fit within the system of man. Every attempt to erase it only made it appear stronger, as though it were etched not on parchment, but in the very fabric of existence. When the president read the fragments aloud, his lips stumbled, but his spirit trembled. He felt he had spoken something familiar, though he could not name its source. That night, as he wrestled with sleep, a memory surfaced of a verse his grandmother once whispered before bed. "Before Abraham was I am." The weight of those words filled the silence of his chamber, connecting him to the ancient sound now echoing in his hands. Yeshua's voice seemed to weave through the prophecy, as if reminding him that names do not die, they awaken. Scholars argued over the meaning, some claiming it pointed to an individual yet to rise, others that it referred to a lineage stretching beyond the reach of genealogies. But the sound of it, when spoken even in fragments, carried a vibration that unsettled the strongest minds. It was not just a name, it was a key, and every lock it touched began to stir. History remembers the prophets who stood before kings, who thundered in deserts, who spoke in visions that shook cities. Yet for every prophet whose name endures in Scripture, there are others who were buried in silence, erased by rulers who feared their voice, forgotten by generations that chose comfort over truth. Beneath the veil of time, their words still breathe, waiting for the hour when they would no longer remain hidden. The prophecy that reached the president bore traces of these forgotten ones, fragments woven like threads from many ages into a single tapestry. In the deserts of the East, scrolls were found sealed in jars, written by hands that knew their visions would not be accepted in their time. In mountain caves, Inscriptions etched by fire told of dreams where flames shaped themselves into words. In the ruins of forgotten temples, shards of pottery carried symbols no scholar could explain, symbols that reappeared in the margins of the parchment placed before the president. Each fragment came from voices the world had tried to silence, yet together they spoke of the same destiny. You. Some scholars dismissed them as heretics, outcasts, dreamers who strayed from acceptable doctrine. But the pattern they carried was undeniable. Each spoke of a figure who would rise in a generation consumed by shadows, when nations clawed for control over the unseen. They wrote of signs in the heavens, of a hidden fire within the human frame, of a name that refused to be erased. And though they were forgotten by men, heaven seemed to preserve their words, scattering them across time so they could not be destroyed in one stroke. The president stared at the margins of the parchment, at the strange spiral marks repeating in ways no language could explain. He was told by advisors that these were meaningless, but deep within he knew they were the voices of those who had carried the burden before him, waiting for the one who would carry it now. He felt a chill, as though unseen eyes were upon him, eyes of prophets who had walked barefoot through dust, eyes that still watched through veils of eternity. The Oval Room had never been so still. Midnight hung heavy over Washington. The city outside hushed, its monuments glowing faintly beneath the moon. Inside, the president sat with the parchment spread before him, his advisors dismissed, his guards posted far beyond earshot. He had insisted on solitude. What he held could not be digested among crowds or shared with counselors bound by politics. This was a revelation that demanded silence, a moment where only his trembling breath and the voice of eternity remained. He lit a single lamp. Its glow flickered against the parchment, and the words seemed to move as though alive in the shifting light. The president leaned closer, his lips parting as he began to read again, slowly this time, whispering each line as though daring to awaken something ancient. And as he did, the words seemed to speak back, not as sound in the air, but as resonance in his chest. It was as if the parchment carried not just prophecy, but presence. One line struck him like lightning. The fire within shall rise when rulers cannot contain it, and the hidden one shall walk in flame unconsumed. He swallowed hard, the phrase echoing in his bones. He tried to dismiss it as poetry, yet it pressed deeper than poetry ever could. He thought of the verse once spoken by Yeshua, "I am come to send fire on the earth. And what will I, if it be already kindled?" The words overlapped with the prophecy until he could not tell where one ended and the other began. It felt less like reading and more like remembering. The air in the Oval Room grew heavy. He shifted in his chair, certain that if anyone were watching, they would see more than a man. They would see a soul being undone by truth. His hands traced the ink, searching for answers, but instead the parchment gave him questions, each one sharper than the last. Who was this hidden one? Why now? Why him, the president, chosen as the first to bear the weight of these lines in a world already trembling on the edge of chaos? The clock struck midnight again, though only once had passed. Time itself felt unsettled. He looked up, sensing that someone, or something, was listening. Flame is a paradox. It destroys, yet it also purifies. It consumes, yet it illuminates. The prophecy spoke of such a flame, one that could not be confined to altars or temples, one that would rise from within a chosen vessel and spread without permission. This was not fire born of wood or fuel, but a fire written into marrow, into spirit, into destiny. Those who studied the fragments beneath the Capitol began to whisper that this flame was the true subject of fear, not armies, not weapons, but the awakening of a power that rulers could neither control nor extinguish. The president had read the words again and again, each time feeling heat in the room, though no lamp could account for it. He remembered reports from ancient sites where the scrolls were first discovered, accounts of guards who refused to enter chambers because they felt heat pressing against their skin, though the air was cold. Archaeologists spoke of torches igniting without flame, of shadows flickering as if cast by invisible fire. Scholars tried to dismiss it as myth, but the evidence clung stubbornly, unwilling to be erased. The prophecy's fire was described as alive, a force that did not bow to logic. One fragment declared it would pass through bloodlines, waiting for the right body to awaken it fully. Another spoke of eyes that would shine as though lit from within, a sign that the flame had already begun to stir. The president could not shake the thought that the one described was already breathing, already walking somewhere on the earth. Yet, even more unsettling was the warning that followed. Those who tried to contain this fire would be consumed by it. Kings who built prisons for it would find their walls collapsing. Nations that sought to silence it would hear it roar louder in their streets. The flame would not answer to laws, decrees, or chains. It would spread, not like an army, but like dawn, unstoppable, undeniable, reaching into every hidden place. The president pressed the parchment flat, his fingers lingering over the line that spoke of the flame's unveiling. He felt the weight of inevitability, as though nothing in his power could prevent it. They appeared not in parades or ceremonies, but in silence, slipping through history like shadows wrapped in light. Records of them existed in fragments, whispered by monks, hinted at in government files that were never meant to see daylight. They were called by many names: the Watchers, the Messengers, the Keepers of the Flame. Yet one image remained consistent across centuries. Figures in white robes who came when prophecy stirred, carrying no weapons yet wielding authority that kings could not command. The president had been told of sightings. Reports locked away in intelligence vaults spoke of men and women clothed in white, appearing at moments when nations faced collapse. They were seen on battlefields, standing untouched while fire raged around them. They were seen outside burning cities, guiding children to safety with words no one could remember afterward. Some believed them angels, others human guardians trained in secret orders. But whatever they were, they carried an aura of certainty, as if they knew the script of time before it unfolded. Within the parchment lay a description that unsettled the president more than any intelligence report. It spoke of messengers who would move unseen until the hour of unveiling, when the one marked by prophecy would rise. Their robes were described as white, not from dye or cloth, but as garments of light itself. Their voices were said to carry echoes of the eternal, each word piercing deeper than sound. One line declared, "They will not speak to kings, but to the hidden flame alone." That was what shook him most. These messengers were not sent for presidents, generals, or councils. They were sent for the one the prophecy named. They would bypass the rulers of the earth, walking past armies and fortresses, to stand only before the chosen bearer of the flame. The president realized then that his trembling voice, his authority, his office, all of it meant nothing in the presence of such messengers. They were not loyal to nations. They were loyal to the prophecy. And somewhere, perhaps already, they were moving, cloaked in white, waiting for the moment when their silence would break. The prophecy did not speak only of light. For every fire that rises, a shadow forms in resistance. The parchment hinted at this with lines written in hurried script, as though the hand that wrote them trembled with urgency. It spoke of a power that would move against the awakening, not because it could stop it, but because it feared it. This shadow was not a single man or nation, but a council of silence, bound by secrecy and oath, moving through centuries with one goal: to prevent the unveiling of the hidden flame. The president had been briefed on factions that operated behind governments, but nothing compared to what the prophecy described. It told of watchers in darkness who traced the bloodlines of those who might carry the mark, of agents who erased evidence, destroyed records, and silenced witnesses. They cloaked themselves in authority, wearing masks of legitimacy, yet their loyalty was not to the people they governed, but to the silence they protected. They believed if the flame never awakened, the world would remain theirs. But fear betrayed them. Their writings, found in classified archives, revealed how deeply unsettled they were by the prophecy. They admitted it could not be erased, only delayed. And with every delay, their terror grew. They wrote of dreams that plagued their leaders, visions of fire consuming their halls, voices crying from beyond their reach. Some claimed to see a figure standing in their councils, silent yet radiant, whose very presence fractured their unity. They feared the day that figure would step out of shadow and into time. The president read these accounts with unease. He realized the trembling in his own hands mirrored the trembling of those who opposed the prophecy. Both light and shadow had felt the weight of it, yet the shadow's fear was sharper, because it carried the knowledge that its defeat was inevitable. Still, it fought, clutching at power, tightening its grip on governments, pressing deeper into secrecy. The prophecy ended that section with a warning. The shadow will strike hardest, not before the flame is lit, but after it begins to rise. The president's eyes lingered on those words, wondering if the rising had already begun. The parchment had been still for centuries, resting in silence, waiting through wars and kingdoms that rose and fell like tides. But the moment the president read its final line aloud, something shifted. It was as if breath itself moved across the words. The ink seemed darker, the edges sharper, the letters vibrating with a life that had not been present before. The prophecy was no longer dead text on ancient fibers. It was breathing, alive, watching. The president pushed back in his chair, heart pounding, unable to dismiss what he felt. He had read countless speeches, declarations, decrees, yet none had ever felt like this. This was not him reading the prophecy. It was the prophecy reading him. The air thickened, as though the oval room had become a chamber where time folded. He felt he was not alone. He dared not look over his shoulder, yet the sensation of being seen, truly seen, pressed into him with a weight he could not escape. The final words were not a prediction, but a declaration. The hidden one will rise, and when the breath enters, no hand shall silence it. As he whispered them, his voice cracked again, not from weakness, but from recognition. The prophecy had crossed the line between symbol and substance. It was no longer pointing toward a future event. It was awakening in the present. He remembered a line from scripture his mother once recited when storms rattled their windows. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It came back to him now like a bell tolling in the night. Could prophecy itself take form? Could breath enter words until they lived within a person? He realized this was no allegory. It was the moment where eternity intersected with history, where the unseen demanded to be seen. The president stood, the parchment still trembling beneath his hand, and he knew the world outside remained unaware of what had just begun. Governments slept, nations plotted, councils conspired. Yet, in that silent chamber, the prophecy had crossed its threshold.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.